Welcome to the Security Nexus Deep Dive. Early on, I really want to invite you to visit thesecuritynexus.net to explore more of our resources. The Security Nexus is a Maryland-based national security consultancy. We specialize in strategic advisory, education, and public engagement. Through podcasts, blogs, training, and consulting, we provide insight into the evolving landscape of cyber threats, hybrid warfare, and strategic security policy. Our mission is to inform, educate, and empower both professionals and the public through clear, accessible, and actionable knowledge. Today, we're bringing you an explainer on an absolutely foundational issue in global security, and that's Russia's unique relationship with its foreign intelligence apparatus. We're going to see exactly how Russia treats foreign intelligence not just as some background support function, but literally as a primary instrument of state power. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to define the intelligence state, trace its real origins, separate imperial tradecraft facts from the myths, examine a major historical failure, and finally follow that unbroken legacy from the Tsars right up to the Soviets. So let's just dive right in.
Section 1. The Intelligence State, Framing the Narrative.
Let's start with our core concept. The scholar Yakov Falkov describes Russia as having an intelligence-exalting strategic culture. So what does that actually mean in practice? Well, in a lot of nations, foreign intelligence is basically viewed as a supporting player, right? It's a service that gathers info to help out the military or the diplomats. But in Russia, historically and today, it is so much more than that. The leaders of the Russian state have historically funded, protected, and politically empowered their intelligence services because they view them as absolutely central to state power itself. The big takeaway here is that this centrality isn't some accident. It's literally built into the state's DNA.
To really grasp why this matters right now, we just need to look at how Russia's modern Foreign Intelligence Service, the SVR, views its own history. Noah Wicken's research highlights what he calls the Державники master narrative. Now, Державники basically translates to great power. The SVR completely frames foreign intelligence as indispensable to Russia's identity as a great power, a power that constantly has to balance against rival states in a highly dangerous world. So this official history is not just some academic exercise. It's a carefully crafted narrative designed to justify exactly why the intelligence service has to remain powerful, well-funded, and right at the very center of Russian foreign policy.
Moving on to Section 2, Origins and Early Dilemmas, the Roots of the System. To understand their modern posture, we've got to look at where Russian foreign intelligence actually begins. And spoiler alert, it isn't some vague, ancient civilizational trait. According to Yevgeny Primakov's official SVR history, it was forged by two very specific, very harsh structural conditions. First, you had centuries of Mongol and Tatar vassalage, which severely limited Russia's ability to even conduct independent foreign relations. And second, there was constant warfare among the internal Rest principalities. This meant that early intelligence gathering was actually directed inward, at each other, rather than looking outward. So from the very beginning, this incredibly harsh, inward-looking environment created a distinct, almost paranoid survivalist mindset.
The formal start of all this really kicks off in the early modern period. In 1549, Ivan the Terrible founds the Pozolsky Prikaz. This is a massive institutional starting point because it wasn't just a simple spy agency. It fused diplomacy, state archives, foreign correspondence, and secret intelligence work entirely under one roof. And that specific institutional DNA, it evolved directly into the Okhrana under the Tsars, the Cheka under the Soviets, and the SVR that we see today.
But here's the catch. Being at the center of autocratic power comes with some pretty immense risks. Take Ivan Mikhailovich Viskovati, for example. He was totally instrumental in the Pozolsky Prikaz. He centralized diplomatic correspondence, he personally briefed the Tsar, and he was incredibly powerful. He seemed completely indispensable. Yet, during the brutal purges of the Ocherki, Ivan IV just had him executed. Talk about a toxic workplace, right? But it perfectly establishes this recurring, fatal paradox in the Russian intelligence state. An intelligence official can be utterly indispensable to an autocratic ruler, and simultaneously entirely vulnerable to that exact same ruler. We see this dynamic play out over and over again.
Section 3. Imperial Tradecraft and Myths, Facts versus Official Narratives. Okay, let's move to the Tsarist era and do a little myth-busting. There's this persistent, almost comical misconception out there that pre-revolutionary Russian intelligence was somehow clumsy or primitive. But independent scholarship from historians like Christopher Andrew, Vladlen Izmozik, and Peter Waldron proves that's just not true. The Tsarist state ran highly sophisticated operations,
The most famous were the Chernia Kabinets, or black cabinets. These units conducted systematic mail interception, a process called perlustration, where they intercepted and read massive volumes of both domestic and foreign mail. And they were really good at advanced cryptanalysis, actively breaking the diplomatic codes of other European powers. So yeah, far from primitive. They were actually cutting edge for their time.
And that level of sophistication leads to some pretty wild historical claims. Let's look at the handsome Leandre case from the SVR's official history. The SVR actually claims that the legendary French diplomat Charles Maurice de Talleyrand was a high-level source for Russian intelligence. Now, we've got to take this with a grain of salt. The SVR obviously has a huge institutional incentive to elevate this story, right? Claiming one of Europe's greatest statesmen was on their payroll seriously boosts their prestige. But, given Talleyrand's notoriously flexible loyalties throughout his career, the general claim is actually entirely plausible. It really shows the sheer ambition of Russian intelligence at the time.
However, we always have to separate institutional myth from archival reality. Think about the intelligence buildup right before Napoleon invaded Russia in 1812. The popular Russian and SVR narrative heavily romanticizes a guy named Colonel Alexander Chernyshev. They portray him as this dashing, ultimate spy who brilliantly stole Napoleon's secrets. But archival research by scholar Vladimir Zemtsov completely cracks this. The reality? The much less flashy Ambassador Alexander Kurykin was actually the crucial intelligence resident in Paris who was managing the real network.
This is exactly why independent research is so vital. The archival evidence proves that not only was Ambassador Kurykin the true mastermind of the Paris Collection Center, but our supposed hero, Colonel Chernyshev, was actually engaging in reckless behavior that literally threatened to expose and destroy Kuryakin's entire intelligence operation. So it's a perfect example of why you always have to cross-check official intelligence histories against independent scholarship.
Section 4. Failures of the System. The Russo-Japanese War. So here's a really important nuance. Just because you have an intelligence-exalting culture, that doesn't magically guarantee your intelligence is actually any good. The Russo-Japanese War in 1904 is the textbook example of this. Russia suffered a completely catastrophic defeat, and scholars like Bruce Menning, Alex Marshall, Philip Strach, and Jack Levy have broken down exactly why. It wasn't just that they didn't have enough data. Yes, they had major collection gaps, but they also had deeply flawed leadership that couldn't properly interpret the data they did have. Even worse, deep-seated racial and cultural stereotypes created massive analytical bias, leading them to totally underestimate Japanese capabilities. Add in some fierce bureaucratic rivalry between the war and foreign ministries, and the whole system just collapsed under its own weight. Centrality simply does not equal competence.
Finally, Section 5, From Czars to Soviets, an Unbroken Legacy.
Moving into the 20th century, we see just how incredibly durable this system really is. When the Russian Empire collapsed in 1917, you'd probably assume its secret institutions died with it, right? Nope, they did not. Scholarly works like Fontanka 16 document this stark continuity of political investigation. Research by Charles Rood, Sergei Stepanov, and Amanda Ward shows how the Tsarist Okhrana's foreign agency, which was already operating globally against revolutionaries, basically laid the exact operational groundwork for the Soviet Cheka. The empire's completely changed hands, but the intelligence apparatus, it just adapted and survived.
Just look at the specific toolkit the Soviet Cheka inherited directly from the Tsarist Okhrana. They didn't have to invent these methods from scratch, they just took them over wholesale. We're talking about foreign residencies, embedded right in embassies, widespread covert surveillance, that advanced cryptanalysis we talked about, and the heavy use of agent provocateurs to infiltrate and disrupt opposition groups. The Cheka simply took the Tsarist playbook, weaponized it even further, and cemented it right into the foundation of the brand new Soviet state.
So, what is the big takeaway from all of this? It's that the intelligence state endures. From the Pozolsky Prikaz in the 1500s, to the Black Cabinets, to the Okhrana, the Cheka, the KGB, all the way to today's SVR. Despite violent revolutions, the total collapse of empires, and the end of the Cold War, the core philosophy has literally never wavered. Russian foreign intelligence remains a primary, exalted pillar of the state's survival and its very identity as a great power. The narrative is entirely unbroken.
And honestly, nothing captures this modern mindset better than a quote from the current director of the SVR, Sergei Naryshkin. Listen to this. Any state that wants to be truly independent and sovereign is obligated to have a powerful intelligence service. That isn't just bureaucratic rhetoric, guys. That is a profound statement of their entire strategic culture. In their worldview, intelligence isn't an accessory to sovereignty. It is the absolute prerequisite for it.
Which brings us right back to the present day. If Russia views its intelligence apparatus not just as a handy tool, but as the literal shield and sword of its great power identity, we have to ask ourselves, how will Russia's deep reliance on this intelligence-exalting identity dictate its very next geopolitical move? When intelligence is that central to how a state sees itself, every single geopolitical action gets viewed through that covert lens. So what do you think that means for their next move? Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer. We really encourage you to keep exploring these crucial topics with us over at the Security Nexus.